Welcome to episode 44 of the Filmumentaries podcast. If you're a new listener, welcome to the podcast. You have just over 1 hour of relaxed movie chat ahead. Do go back and take a listen to the 43 episodes that came before this. Obviously, cherry pick the ones that you like the look of first, but do also listen to ones with guests you know nothing about. You might learn something. Really, that's why I do this podcast. It gives me kind of endless possibilities of study and education. If you're a regular listener, welcome back, and you know the score. If you're a patron on patreon.com/Jamie Benning, huge thanks to you for your support. You know who you are, and you know I love you. As a bonus to patrons of $3 and above, this episode is also available on Patreon in video form. What a treat to watch me and my guest for a good hour. Actually, there's a few sync issues with this one in terms of video, and Frank's audio will not match up with the picture because Zoom was doing some crazy things. I think we had a bit of a dodgy connection, so it was slowing down and speeding up time, so the audio file doesn't fit. I've tried my best to sync it, but it means literally trying to sync every line that came out of our mouths. So you'll see us there anyway, chatting away, and hopefully it won't put you off too much. So as you know, this episode number 44, I have documentary director Frank Pavich. Frank appeared along with Dan Lanigan and Sobi on episode 39 back in November 2021, in which we discussed that purchase of the Jodorowsky's Dune book, which went for $3 million, a story which has been picked up again by the press in the last week or so. Hello, I made a podcast about it in November. Hello, podcast over here. It seems to have sort of hit the press because they're now taking the piss out of this group of people that bought it when they thought they might have bought the rights or the intellectual property ownership of the book. I mean, that discussion did happen on their Discord group quite early on. And a few people were surprised, but most of them knew the score. There was a bit of disarray about what they were going to do with the book and if they could use it in any way or publish it in any way. But I don't know. As crazy as the story is, I don't know. I think all of that just seems a little bit mean. And I was aware of it at the time and I avoided doing that. But hey, I'm not looking for hits and attention like a lot of these big sites are in calling them all a bunch of idiots. So I feel good about that. The documentary Jodorowsky's Dune, which Frank Pavich directed, has been a favourite of mine since I was introduced to it by my friend Nicola Basso back in 2015. He's one of the most talented cameramen I've had the fortune to work with over the years, and a good friend, and also a listener. So, hey, Nico. It had been out a while already then, I remember, but I believe we were in Montreal, and Nicola was being really enthusiastic about this amazing documentary. I regret to say that I did see it on a downloaded copy at the time, but I've since bought it on DVD and Blu-ray, and I have the soundtrack on vinyl, so I don't feel too bad. Sorry, Frank. I watched it there and then in my hotel room and was blown away. I knew nothing about this unmade film. I had no idea that the collaborators went on to help create some of my favourite movies. I needed to know more, so I dived into just about everything I could find about this amazing story, including watching the documentary again and again. That quest still continues to this day. I love hearing and reading every tidbit about Jodorowsky's Dune. So as soon as episode 39 of the podcast was over, I knew I had to get Frank back on. And over the past couple of months, we've become friendly acquaintances that might even stretch to, okay, Frank and I are friends, okay, there I said it. We're buddies, we chat quite a bit, and we share a similar enthusiasm for stories. So you're in for a fun episode here. Enough of all that. Here's my chat with Frank Pavich, and I'll be back at the end with a bit more jabbering on. So Frank, when was your interest in filmmaking first awoken?
I think I first got interested in filmmaking in high school, at the very end of high school. I think I was a junior, and a friend of mine who was a senior was taking... No, I was a senior. I was a senior in high school, and a friend of mine had already graduated, and he was at NYU Film School. And he he showed me the magic of editing. He had 2 SVHS decks at home. I know, big time. We're talking state of the art, super VHS, not regular VHS, super VHS. So he had 2 super VHS decks, and he was playing around with editing. He was taking pieces of Taxi Driver and like chopping it all up. And at that point, I didn't know what Taxi Driver was, let alone, what editing was. And my mind was sort of blown open by that whole thing. And then because of him, because of my friend Jay, my life, had a trajectory. I'm not sure, that's for the better or for the worse, but it was certainly really interesting to me, and it was something I had never, I watched movies, of course, but I'd never really understood any of the how it all worked, the kind of the machinations of it all. But that was it, sitting in his apartment, watching him play with VHS tapes and playing around with Taxi Driver. That was sort of a mind-blowing experience.
There is something quite seductive, isn't there, about when you first discover editing? I remember when it happened to me, and I just thought, hang on, I can put this and this together and make something out of nothing almost. Yeah, it was quite a tantalizing prospect. So did that lead to you going to film school then?
Yeah, so then I managed in high school to take a little video class. I don't even know. My high school didn't offer much. There was nothing in my high school. There was no, it's not like in the movies where it's like, oh, they have shop class and home ec. There was nothing. And I went to I went to the biggest Catholic high school in the United States. I mean, this was not some dinky thing. This was huge. This was a mass 3,000 students in Queens, New York, and they didn't offer anything.
And yet they only had VHS, not super VHS.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I took the class and I was like, all right, where's the SVHS? And they did not have it. And I said, I cannot work with this quality. This is horrible. But I took it was a little tiny, kind of like an elective art class about video editing. And, so I kind of played around a little bit there. And that was, sort of really exciting. So then I decided to go, I applied to the School of Visual Arts in New York for college. So I went there for a year, and there was good and bad there. It was good because it was my first, real introduction to, kind of everything to do with filmmaking. But it was bad to me because it wasn't going to go anywhere. It was such an artsy school. I mean, it was in the name, School of Visual Arts. I guess I should have known.
The clues are
there. Shame on me, I guess. But it was I figured that if I went there for 4 years, I would be broke. And I would come out basically with knowing how to point a video camera at a TV monitor and get feedback. That would be the extent, I think, of, of my skills. So I said, oh, okay, so there was a guy I met there who was from California, out west. And he convinced me that the two of us should leave SVA at the end of the year, and we would move to California together. And we would go to school, film school out there. That's where it's all happening, Los Angeles. So I said, okay. And we found this film school called Columbia College Hollywood, which I believe is no longer in existence. But we applied to that school, got in, and right before we were going to leave, get in the car and, drive out west, he said, oh, I can't go anymore. I don't know, my mother won't let me, or some nonsense like that. So I was like, what the hell? And I was like, well, okay, I've already made my decision. I don't want to be at SVA anymore. And, California is so much nicer than New York, especially this is 1992. So New York was really horrible at that time. It wasn't 1970s. Speaking of Taxi Driver, it wasn't 1970s New York, but it was not good. Late 80s, early 90s New York was not a safe or fun place. So I was like, great, I'm going to go to California. So I went to LA and I went to this school called Columbia College Hollywood, which was the polar opposite of SVA. So SVA was all, art, art, art. This was was basically like a technical trade school. Like I think if you graduated, you would leave with like a set of tools. I mean, it was just horrible. I was there for a year, and in my opinion, the school was a scam for foreign exchange students, because it was like 70 or 80% of the student body were from other countries. And I think they would kind of lure them there. And, if the student left the school, they would lose their student visa. So they would have to leave the US. So I think it was a way to kind of get this, tuition from these students, but not have to teach them anything, because it was just horrible. It was a horrible place. So about 15 of us got really fed up, and we approached a teacher, and we decided to make our own school. And we took this teacher with us, and we got a loft in downtown LA, and we hired a couple of other teachers, and we basically created a curriculum and compressed 4 years of film school into 1 year, and shot short films, and we had a screenwriting teacher and a cinematography teacher and producing teacher and all that kind of stuff, and we did it all ourselves, hands-on. And then after that year, when we learned everything, the school basically collapsed. We didn't have a way to reach other people to come and sort of take our place to keep the school going. So it just kind of died. But many years later, I came across this school in Hollywood. I think it's called the Los Angeles Film School, I think. And I don't know if it still exists, but it was across the street from the Cinerama Dome. If you ever seen like pictures of LA, like that famous place, it was literally across the street from there in this building. And I was like, what is this LA Film School? And I looked it up, and the guy that was running it was the guy that we approached, the guy that we took, and the guy that we created the school with.
Oh, wow.
So I contacted him, and went to go have lunch with him one day and check out the school. And it was basically our idea, like our dream of what it should be, but with money and with technology, because technology had progressed, and they had Avids and all these things that weren't even invented when we were in school. And it was like kind of like this dream, this dream school, that what we had wanted to do, they actually accomplished. So that was a pretty amazing.
That's very cool.
That was a pretty amazing thing. I don't know if it still exists. I hope it does, because it was really exciting to walk around. I almost wanted to enroll, even though it was 15 years later. But it was pretty wild. Yeah.
And what had you done in the meantime here then? So you started on your first film soon after doing this year, sort of foundation?
Yeah. Basically, I did that, and at the same time, I volunteered on other student films in other schools, really at AFI, at the American Film Institute, because they have this 2-year program, and the second year films, the thesis films of the second year students are they're short films, but they might as well be features. I mean, the budget behind them, it's just sort of insane. So I would volunteer my time to work on them, to PA and location manage and AD and all that kind of stuff. And it was there was one film I worked on which was a short film, it was a half-hour film, and it had a 3-week shooting schedule. I mean, so this was, and all these professionals would come and they would volunteer and work on them, and they would use these student films as ways to teach other people, kind of share their knowledge, and also kind of network and stuff. So it was this kind of amazing thing. So I really, I did a couple of those, and, through there, got real jobs, because those people, would go on to other projects, and, they would contact me, and I started, doing other things here and there. And then I ended up, through one of those AFI films, the producer of one of them formed a production company. And he partnered with Anthony Edwards, who was the star of ER at the time.
Yeah.
So they had a business partnership, and they had a deal with Warner Brothers. So I worked for them for a bunch of years, doing I was their assistant, and then I did development, and eventually had a producing credit on one of the few films that we made there. So I spent a lot of time kind of in that strange world of reading scripts and pitching them and getting rejected. I mean, that's kind of it's like that's the life of development.
And was the intention for you in your mind to go and direct something?
I never really thought about it. It actually never was an interest of mine, or it was never a desire of mine, I should say. The first film that I directed was a documentary called NYHC, which stands for New York Hardcore.
I was trying to track it down. I couldn't.
Oh, I have to send you a link to it, a screen link. Yeah, if you can stand it. I mean, it's the music is.
Yeah,
you're not going to come humming. You're not going to walk away humming the tunes afterwards. I don't think. Unless you have bad taste like I do, apparently. But that kind of just happened organically. Like I was living in LA, and I would go back to New York for like holidays to see my family and stuff. And whenever I was there, I would go to these hardcore shows. And it was really fun. And then I'd go back to LA, and there was nothing. At least at that time, there was nothing. And it really made me sad. And I was like, oh, I wish there was something here. I wish there was like cool bands here. And so then a friend of mine said, well, why don't we make a plan, and why don't we go there and literally document what's going on in New York? Like, not a history of or anything, but like literally what's happening in that ever-changing scene at a certain moment. So we chose the summer, and we went back. We shot for 3 weeks about what was happening in that scene. We chose 7 bands and kind of focused on them and shot shows and interviews and kind of ran around with them and stuff like that. And I just kind of ended up directing it. It wasn't even my plan to direct it. It was kind of like, let's go make it, and then okay, well, I'll do the interviews, and then then I kind of just became the director, and that was a team of 2 or 3 people, and okay, I'll take that job, I'll do that. And that's sort of what happened, which is, maybe not the normal route.
Yeah, and had those skills you'd learn in your sort of almost college, almost film school, had they served you well, do you think, all of that stuff you'd done?
No. Actually, no, because I never studied documentary filmmaking.
Yeah, right, okay.
So it was a completely other world, It was just like, yeah, that's an interesting question, but no, really none of it actually helped me, as a matter of fact. Wow, if that is not a ringing endorsement for film school, I don't know. Wow,
yeah, I mean, I went to media. I did a media and production degree, which had live TV, post-production, filmmaking, and none of it was any use for my career in television. None of it, other than the piece of paper that it's written on.
Really? Yeah, nothing translated for you either?
Nothing. No.
What's going on?
I mean, it was a pretty crappy course to begin with, but also I think the real world of making a production cannot be replicated in a college environment unless you go and work alongside professionals, I think, which we didn't have the opportunity to do. Had you been a kind of follower of documentary films? Was it something that interested you, or was it the storytelling side of it that interested you? What kind of drew you into documentary making?
I mean, I've always liked documentaries, for sure. It was never, I don't know if it was ever something that I, watched exclusively, or if that was always the top of the list. But, I love, if there's a good documentary, I love it. Of course, it's, they're incredible. And I think what drew me to it, to making them is that, at least for me, it's, I don't know if probably easier is not the right term, but it's more realistic to make a documentary because you can just start.
Yeah.
You can kind of build it as you go along. While if you're making a narrative film, you've got to write it beforehand, and then you've got to get everything together to make those pages into something real. And that takes a lot of money and a lot of people and a lot of, technology that also didn't exist. As I was saying, it didn't exist when I was starting. There was no digital filmmaking. There was nothing, when I made NYHC, I was editing, we shot it on Beta on Beta SP, and I transferred them to 3/4. Each of those tapes I transferred to 3/4 inch tapes, and I had two 50-year-old Russian, I suppose, 3/4 decks, and that's how I edited the movie. I mean, tape to tape, it was a horrible experience. But it was realistic because you could do it in stages. Okay, let's go shoot it. And then, okay, now we've shot it and we've got all these tapes. And then, okay, now let's figure out what's the next stage. How do we do this? And everything was sort of manageable because you could do it alone, for the most part.
But how much of your original intention in going into NYHC was changed as in the production of it? Because I think you go into a project, don't you, with a certain bias, a certain mindset maybe. But I think documentary, like no other creative form in film, you can discover something new along the way. Is that what happened with that film?
I mean, for sure. I mean, it definitely, it happened, it really happened in the stories of the people, I didn't know the people. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know any of these bands beforehand. I just kind of contacted them, wrote them letters, or got a friend to connect me through the phone, about a month or two before, just so we could sort of plan out who would be interested and, who'd be willing to let these, maniacs come and film them. But I had no personal relationships with them. So it wasn't like I knew any of the topics that we would discuss. I didn't know what their answers would be to my questions. And some of them were, were surprising and shocking. And so I think that, I kind of, it's hard to say, it was so long ago, first of all, it's hard to say what I was, thinking the film would be at the start. But the film took so long to make that it all just kind of blended in. It's all kind of one big, experience for me because, editing on those tapes and, smoke coming out of the machine. Okay, got to take it to the repair shop. It took 4 years just to edit the stupid thing because it was torture. It was true. It was a torturous experience. It was really the worst thing I'd ever done in my entire life. I would not recommend trying to edit a film on, in that method. But it's all kind of one experience, the shooting and those 4 years sitting, alone at home, editing, that's all kind of became one thing. So the end product sort of represents all of it to me. But it was really just about kind of being open and going in and let's just shoot interviews, let's just talk to people and then we'll, take it all back home and figure out how to piece it all together, So yeah, it was kind of a strange, I'm not sure if that's the best way to make films, but
maybe
but it worked for that one, I guess.
How did what was the genesis of Jodorowsky's Dune then? When did that kind of appear on your radar?
I would say 2010. 2010. A friend of mine who I produced a film with, he introduced me to the films of Jodorowsky, and he came up with this idea. He basically was like, told me all about Jodorowsky's, the concept of Jodorowsky's Dune. And again, he was the guy that I made NYHC with, and it was kind of like the same thing. Like we looked at each other like, hey, why don't we go try to make a documentary? Because I guess we didn't learn our lesson from, killing ourselves on the last one.
But how well known was that story?
Let's try and do this one. It was not well known, which is the thing. That's why it was interesting. There was nothing about it out there. There was the only thing that I know. Well, it's a fact because I would know at this point if there was more that it existed. The only things that existed was there was a couple of books, like the 50 greatest movies never made, and if you flip through those books, the one that's leaps and bounds better than the other ones is Alejandro Jodorowsky's attempt to make Dune. Mm-hmm. So it existed there, like a page or two in these books, and it existed in a short segment in a documentary called Constellation Jodorowsky, which is a Swiss, I think it's a Swiss, the guy is from Geneva, so I think it must be a Swiss documentary. And it's broader in scope than Jodorowsky's Dune. It covers a lot more of Jodo's life and work, but there's a small segment in the film, a couple of minutes, where they talk about Dune. And there's a shot of him sort of flipping through that book. And it was like, what the hell's that? And that movie is the only instance that I've ever seen of the existence of that book. Doing more research, then there was like an issue of Metal Hurlan, which had a big section dedicated, interview with Jodorowsky, all about that. But there you could see artwork, but you never saw the existence of that book. So it was really the appearance of it in that documentary was like, oh, there's something here. There's something to really go after. So that's kind of where it all sort of stemmed from, I think.
And what was the first step for you to jump in with 2 feet with this project? Because, I mean, it's a project with pretty big scope, given the amount of names involved and the different routes you could have gone down. What was your first approach?
The first, to me, the only thing that made sense is to start at the top. I mean, really? Because if you don't start at the top, then there's no point. Because if you get everything else, but Alejandro says no, then I don't want to make that movie. I don't want to watch the film without him. And that's, he's got to tell me the story because the story doesn't exist. That's not out there anywhere. Nobody else can speak about it, really, except for him. So I looked online, and I was like, how am I going to contact Alejandro Jodorowsky? Like, thinking he lives like on a, literally on the top of the holy mountain or something. Like, you don't think he's a real person. He was a myth. At that point, he was out of the public eye for, he hadn't made a movie in 20 years or so. Where was he? Where did he live? Who was this guy? So I was searching around online, like, how am I going to contact him? And I came across this website of this agency. And it was this woman who said on this website that she was his agent, that she represented him. And I was like, Alejandro Jodorowsky has an agent? That seems weird. Like, he should not have an accountant. He shouldn't have an agent. He shouldn't have any of that. He's Jodorowsky. He lives on a different plane, right? So I sent her an email, and I was just basically like, is it true that you represent this guy? I would like, if so, I would like to speak to him about the possibility of making a documentary about Dune. And I sent the email like, okay, am I ever going to hear anything? Who knows? And it must have been a couple of weeks later, I woke up one day and I opened up my email, and there was an email, not from the agent, but from Jodo. And I was like, that was an exhilarating experience, but also terrifying.
I bet.
Because I could have, what if he had said no? What if I opened up the email and he said no? Or what if I opened the email and he said, oh, I'm already working on this film with somebody else, or
I am now that you've given me the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the idea, sucker. See ya. Something like that. And so I didn't want my hopes to be dashed. So I didn't open it for a week, and I just walked around pretending that that he and I were, yeah, sure. I didn't want to have everything ruined. I wanted that last bit of fantasy life. So I just walked around thinking like, oh, he and I are friends. We're making this movie. It's going to be great. And then after a week, I was like, okay, I gotta grow up and open this thing and just have my hopes destroyed. And I opened the email, and it was a very simple message, and it basically said like, I understand that you're looking for me. I live in Paris, and if you want to speak to me about this, you need to come to Paris, and we need to meet face to face.
And answer this email within 3 days.
Exactly. No. Yeah, exactly. Oh, and it self-destructed.
Wow. I mean, that's a hell of a moment there. I can't imagine what that must feel like to kind of get the response that you'd wish for. And therefore, did you go straight to Paris? And
then I went to Paris. I happened to be in, I was living in New York at the time, but I happened to be in Geneva because my wife was living here, or was just gotten a job here. So she was based here for a bit. So I was here with her. And, after opening the email and seeing what it said, then, she says, oh, well, you should go to Paris. It's only 3 hours on the train from Geneva. And sure enough, I didn't even know. I'd never been to Paris in my life. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's 3 hours on the train. Great. And I bought a train ticket. And, went to Paris and went to his apartment. He lives in an apartment, not on the top of a mountain, but he lives in a regular, beautiful apartment, but an apartment. And so I went to his home and met with him, and we met, and we sat in these two chairs across from each other, and the book was between us on like an ottoman, but it was facing him, so the title, it was facing his direction. I was there for maybe 10, 15 minutes. He never invited me to open the book. I didn't get to see it, nothing like that, which was pretty interesting. But he said, sounds great. Sounds like a really interesting project. You seem nice, I guess, or whatever. And, he said, okay, sounds good. He said, but there's a problem. And I said, okay, what's the problem? Thinking, okay, I'm sitting across from Jodo. No problem is insurmountable at this point. He said, the problem is Michel Sardou. He has the artwork. He has the storyboards. And he was the producer. So you need to get with him to, access the storyboards and to get his involvement, because without that, there's no story. I said, okay, piece of cake. I said, just give me his contact info. I'll contact him. And no problem. He said, that's the problem. He said, I think Michel Sardou hates me. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we worked on Dune all those years ago. We worked on it for 2 years. I spent millions of Michel Sardou's money, millions of dollars, and there was no film in the end. And Michel Sardou, he must hate me because he must think I'm not a good artist and not a good director, and he must think that I let him down, that we didn't have this film. So I said, okay. So I got back on the train and I went to Geneva, and then I researched, okay, where's Michel Sardou? How am I going to find him? Okay, his company still exists. Everything, okay, great. Sent them an email, made an appointment, got back on the train, went back to Paris, went to go meet with Michel. I walked into his office. It's the same company from when they were making Dune. It's Camera One. Everything's the same. I guess different location, but the same name. And I walked into the office, and the first thing I saw on the wall was an original Dune piece of artwork by Chris Voss. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. They lead me into this conference room where I sit and I wait for Michel Sardou. There's another piece of Dune artwork. And there was a Holy Mountain poster. One I had never seen before. It was one drawn by Alejandro. And it was like, oh, to Michel, and it was this crazy thing. Never seen it in a book, never seen it online, nowhere. It's just there. And I was like, this is amazing. I was like, well, there's no way that this guy hates Alejandro, because he's living with him. Every single day he goes to this office, and every room there's another piece of his life with him. So Michel comes out and we sit, and he's like the nicest guy in the world. I mean, he's one of the richest people in the world. He's part of the Schlumberger family, which is like a rich oil company. Yeah. He has two brothers. One owns Pathé, and the other one owns Gaumont. So they're massive. Then you have Michel, who just like, fuck everything. He just does whatever he wants to do. Like, he makes crazy movies. He's just the best. Michel's like, to me, he's the greatest. He's so awesome. And so we're talking with him, and I'm talking with him, and he's like, oh, it sounds like a great documentary. It's a really important story. Yes, I'll help you do it. I'll do whatever I can. I'll be your co-producer. We'll do everything. No problem. I'll support you 100%. And I said, this is great. And then he said, but there's a problem. And I said, okay, what's the problem? He says, I think Alejandro hates me. I said, what do you mean Alejandro hates you? He says, well, we worked on Dune all those years ago. We spent 2 years, and at the end, I failed Alejandro. He must think that I let him down. He must think that I'm not a good producer, that I didn't support him enough. And, we haven't seen each other in 35 years or something. He must hate me. And so I tried to explain, I don't think he does. And then I had to go back to Alejandro and sort of, get everything going. And then during the filming of the documentary, I think it was my sound recordist, we were talking. He says, we should get them together. Like, let's, shoot something with the two of them together. So after we had done, all the main. This is on the first time in Paris and shooting, and after we had done all of our main interviews, we convinced the two of them to meet in a neutral ground, like not at Michelle's office, not at Jodo's house, but like we chose this park, which I didn't realize we couldn't shoot in. The police came right, we were like getting our camera set up before Michelle and Jodo came. The police kicked us out of the park, and then Jodo showed up, and he was there, and he was getting nervous, like, I don't think Michelle's gonna come. And he started having second thoughts, and just when he was ready to walk away, this second car pulls up. Michelle gets out. They see each other. They hug, and it's like no time had passed.
Wow!
We just started rolling and started kind of following them all around through the streets as they just reminisced with each other. Oh, how are you? How's your wife? Oh, she's fine, but it's a different wife than you met. All these kind of things. And then after that day, at the end of that day, they made a plan to get together by themselves. To have lunch and catch up further. And a little while later, a couple of weeks, couple of months, I don't know, they got together and they had lunch, and Michelle said to Alejandro, what are you working on? Are you making any films? At that point, Jodo hadn't made a film in 20-something years. He could not get financing. He had a project with David Lynch. He had a project, I think, with Marilyn Manson. I mean, could not get financing. Everything was collapsing. And he said, I just wrote the first book of basically the story of my life. It's called The Dance of Reality. And my goal now is to make that into a film. That's my real dream, is to make my story into a film. And Michelle said, great, I'll be your producer. I'll give you €1 million. Let's go make it together. And they did.
Amazing. I mean, if it had stopped there, your work was done, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Even if my film never got finished, I mean, something else happened, and it happened at the same time, where his film and where Dance of Reality and Jodorowsky's Dune were finished at the same time, and they premiered one after the other at Cannes in 2013, and it was this crazy, amazing experience, and it was all because these two guys came back together, and it's because of their generosity. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Alejandro didn't know me. I'm some maniac coming in off the street, and he let me tell the story. And same thing with Michelle. I didn't, he never asked me, neither one of them asked me, who are you? What have you done before? Let me see your credentials. Nothing. They just went along with it, and they're completely open. And neither one of them hated each other, obviously, but they were worried that they had hurt the other person.
Yeah.
And when they realized that wasn't the case, then they could have this immense friendship and relationship again, and then the world got Dance of Reality, which to me is the best of all. It's my favorite of all of Jodo's movies. So it's crazy. It's a crazy experience.
That is crazy.
It was really wild.
You do wonder how many people's relationships end because of things like that, where there's just this unspoken thing and they don't resolve it in any way. And it's amazing that you came along to kind of bring them back together again. Did you you got the two pillars in place there for the structure. Did you then go about trying to get Chris Foss and obviously Dan O'Bannon had passed away at that point, but you managed to find some archive material. Was that difficult?
No, it was piece of cake.
Once you got those two, I guess it was...
Once I got them, it was like, Giger, of course, no problem. Chris Foss, of course, no problem. Amanda Lear, this is going back to your earlier question about where did you start? You asked me how did I start making the film? And I said, well, I went to the top guy. When I contacted Amanda Lear, she said, oh, it's so interesting that you would contact me. I just filmed an interview for a documentary on this same subject. I said, what are you talking about? She goes, just a couple of days ago, or maybe it was the day before, something like that. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, yeah, these two French filmmakers. I sat down, I did a whole interview with them. They're making a documentary on the same subject.
Huh.
So I called up, Alejandro, and I was like, do you know anything about this? What is this? And he says, I have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, so then I contact these two French filmmakers, and I was like, hey, what's going on? Are you making, I'm making the same film you are. What's going on? And they said, oh yeah, they said that we have permission from Alejandro. I said, I don't think you do. And then they basically said that what eventually was revealed is that they had spoken to or contacted Alejandro's assistant at the time. And it was basically like these guys contacted Jodo through this assistant. The assistant was like, hey, Jodo, these guys want to make this film. What do you think? And Jodo's like, yeah, just tell them to go do whatever. And they took that as like, we're going to start. So they had interviewed Amanda Lear, and I think they either were going to, or they had also just interviewed Christian Vander from Magma. So they were sort of working their way up from the outer characters, of the film. And I basically, had to tell them like, sorry, but and I felt I still feel horrible to this day, but what was I going to do?
There's a lesson there then, as you say, start at the top. There's no other approach. Yeah.
How else would you do it? Like, I just don't, to me, you have to go to that. Cause if they say no, then you're going to be stuck with a bunch of footage that you can't do anything with. So, so that was a weird experience, but and I only learned that from contacting, the other people like Amanda and stuff. But everybody, once I said, oh, I'm working, Alejandro's on board, Michelle Sadou's on board, they were thrilled and they jumped at the chance to take part in the documentary because they all had such amazing experiences making Dune. They all had these great stories and they all loved Alejandro and they all wanted to, tell their stories and, oh, then this happened and then they did this and they were, totally excited and everybody was completely open and, even Giger, we filmed him at his museum. And at the end of after the shoot, basically the staffed museum was like, okay, here's the keys. After you take all your equipment, just lock the door. We're going to be across the street at the bar, come join us for a drink. And I'm like locking the museum doors. Like, okay, this is weird. So that's how open, everybody was involved in it, because it was pure. It was a pure story about a pure experience that they all shared,
And were you editing as you were shooting as well, or did that come later?
Yeah, I was. The first thing I did was transcribe all the interviews, and I literally, this is independent filmmaking. I was literally transcribing anything in English. I transcribed myself the entire interview, and anything French or Spanish or German that I found a guy who I found two guys who did those three languages, and they helped me out by doing all that. But that was the first key to me, is sort of getting all the transcripts, and then I can really look at it on paper and see, okay, what are the stories? Where did they go? And then, through my rudimentary caveman editing skills, I started, kind of putting blocks together and stuff like that. And until we got an editor, the first editor was a guy named Paul Doherty, who came on, just, volunteered, was like, oh, I hear you're making this documentary. I want to be a part of it. And he, like all of us, there was no money. I didn't have anything to pay anybody. And he came on and did the really hard work of, really going through the stuff in the beginning and trying to figure out, okay, what's the story? What are the, and I think you have to start, because we took 3 trips to Paris to do interviews, and you have to sort of really know the material that you have before each trip so that you can, try to fill in those gaps and, what are the interesting things that you want to get more of, what are the pieces that are missing, and all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, it's constant. To me, it's constantly editing right from the beginning,
And were there any things that you couldn't leave in that you wanted to leave in? Or, I mean, because it's, what is it, an hour and a half, I think, the film?
Exactly, hour and a half.
Was there any temptation to go longer?
No, I think to me a documentary should be 90 tops. Like that's the, I think NYHC was 87 and Dune was like 88 or 89. Like to me, that's the sweet spot. I mean, are there more things that were interesting? Sure. But would they have served the purpose of the story, or would they have dragged down the structure? I think right now it kind of flows, I think it flows very well, and it gets, before you get too tired or something, it's onto something else. And then it's, oh, they've got all the spiritual warriors together, and they go pitch it. And, it's like, if you keep adding things, if you drag out any of those sections, then the balance, it gets awkward, I think. So there's little, and that's the magic of, I guess, Blu-ray, and DVD. You would have these, extra, little bonus things that are cool and fun, but they don't have to be in the film. I mean, kind of upset it too much, I think.
Well, going back to when you first went to Paris, or the second time you went to Paris after that 15-minute meeting, was that the first time you saw the book, inside the book, and what was your reaction?
Yeah, it must have been. Now I think about it, that second trip, it must have been, because I went from Michel Sadou's office back to Jodo's apartment before I got on the train to go back to Geneva. So that must have been the first time, when I came to him basically with good news. Like, Michel Sardou loves you. He doesn't hate you, I think that was probably the first time that I got to see the book. And it's it's extraordinary. I mean, it's so heavy, it's so dense, it's so massive. It's an amazing thing, and everything. I don't know of any other film that was so completely laid out, so completely realized, with obviously with nothing else to show for it. There's no film. And I know that people storyboard things and people do this, but I don't know if any film has ever been so concisely done in this way. So it's an amazing thing, but it's, I got to look through the book, obviously, many times, especially with all the shooting, I got to film the actual book. And then aside from that, I got to film, the real storyboards, the original, giant, like A1 size pages or something like that, and that's extraordinary, it was just to be able to hold that, and you see, Mobius's pencil lines, and you see that texture on the paper. I mean, that was extraordinary. And that's what I got to scan, high res scan, and, animate all the stuff based on that. Because that's where the book is amazing, because it's, everything's there, but the real quality is in the originals, obviously, because the book is photographs. Even Michel Sardou says it. I mean, it's photographs of, of the artwork. That's all it is. But when you see the real pages of that thing, it's just like, I don't know, you could picture yourself in that studio in 75 in Paris, and, kind of wipe the drugs away from the residual drugs away on the pages, and then God knows what was going on. It's an amazing. Maybe that was it. Maybe there was some hallucinogenics that were on the pages that got absorbed by my fingers. I don't know. It was extraordinary. It was really amazing. It's an amazing thing. Yeah.
I think we spoke about this after our chat with Sobi a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember if it was in the podcast sort of outro, as it were, but I think you and Dan Lanigan and I spoke about how, given that it was so complete in as much as what he wanted was in every page, in every storyboard and costume design and set design, that was potentially its biggest downfall in a way, because it didn't give the studio any space to kind of put their own stamp on it. Do you think that's the case?
I think that's definitely the case. And I think it's more than that. I think it's more than just the studio not being able to, put in their own stamp of creativity, because most of those guys don't have a stamp of creativity. It's like Richard Stanley says in the documentary. He says most of those guys are accountants or bookkeepers. Like, it's about a spreadsheet and the bottom line. It's not about a creative. It's not about a creative desire. But when you present something that's so completed to somebody, it gives them more things to say no to. And if they're of a limited imagination, then they can't translate those pages onto the big screen. They can't say, oh, this page here will be an amazing scene with this. They just can't understand that. They just see these limited pages, and these pages are two-dimensional and they're paper. How can this be a film? They don't have a mind for that. which is, again, Richard Stanley. It's what he says in the film. I mean, he really put it concisely when he says, that they like, what are the things that sell in Hollywood, right? It's those, high concept movies. It's the movie's a cross between this and that, or it's a combination of that movie and this one over here. That's all they know. And if those two movies that you're referencing made a lot of money, then great. Then you get the green light. But if you're bringing something to them which is complete, it just gives them a lot more things to say no to, let alone, and then there's obviously the other elements of the time period we're talking about, and that films like this were not seen as, they were not viable. I think when the three of us were talking after the last interview, I think we were talking about Star Wars, and even when Lucas was making the first Star Wars, nobody believed in it. The studio was looking at him like he was crazy. They were ready to pull the plug at any second. All of his friends, when he would have test screenings for them, they would just laugh at him and say, what the hell are you doing? What is this nonsense? Intergalactic guilds, and nobody could understand it. Nobody's understood what he was doing. So it's a tough thing. But I think if you give too much, it's even like in the documentary, like had we taken the artwork and made something more refined out of it, made some sort of 3D animation, done something that would have taken away from Jodorowsky's vision. First of all, it wouldn't have been his vision. It would have been my vision or the animators or whatever. But even taking all that aside, if it was too polished, it kind of ruins it, because it takes away your imagination to connect those dots, because the beauty of it is, it would have been the greatest movie because you're imagining the greatest movie. You're seeing these roughly, or not roughly, but let's say lightly animated sequences of these storyboards, and your mind is filling in those gaps and saying, it would have been like this, because you're replacing that drawing with Orson Welles, and you're replacing the drawing of Mick Jagger. You're placing the drawing. There's a scene where Mick Jagger cuts David Carradine into little pieces and stuffs him in a box while Orson Welles laughs. I mean, that's what you're imagining. Yeah. On the page, it's just drawings, but you're imagining those three things happening. And that's just that scene alone is the greatest movie ever. I mean, come on. I can't think of anything better than that.
What you did with that animation, though, was very restrained and very simple. I think you allowed people's imaginations still to kind of run riot with some of those ideas, because on paper it does sound crazy, doesn't it? I mean, have those people involved in any way. But there is a parallel universe where this was made, though, in my mind, and I'd love to sort of even begin to understand the repercussions that the arrival of something like that could have had on the movie industry.
There's multiple universes, right? Isn't that the whole thing? And in one of them is ours, which is where his Dune didn't get made, but it still is powerful and still influenced all these things. There's another universe where it got made and it was a huge flop. Nobody understood it. And when if that happened, there's no way that Fox, who was already looking at Lucas like, you're cuckoo, there's no way that Star Wars would have happened. They would have pulled that plug. Once that plug got pulled and that movie didn't happen, then what? What world would we be looking at now in terms of movies, for better or for worse? There's another universe where Jodo's Dune gets finished and it's a huge hit. People are like, this is what movies are supposed to be. This is totally bonkers, totally crazy. It's not realistic in quotes, but it's something special and amazing. And it's artistic and it's unique. And if that happened, and if that became a hit, then what are the movies that follow? What kind of, so Star Wars happened. It was a big success. Everybody wanted to have their Star Wars, right? We've got to have, my movie needs to have spaceships and, laser swords and all these things. If Jodo's Dune was a success, then what? What are the copycat films of that? What are the people that are taking his, taking inspiration from that and going further. That's a cool world.
Yeah.
That's something amazing. But no matter what, I do think that Jodorowsky's Dune is incredibly influential. Whether it's not made, whether it's made and is a failure, or whether it's made and it's a huge success, any of those, or any permutation of any of that, or any variations in any of that, his film is that powerful that it's still... How many films can you say that about? So many movies get made every year or don't get made and have no influence, right? I mean, Avatar was this mega movie however many years ago. Did that influence anything else? Like, who talks about that? Is that anything anymore?
Nope.
No. And that's not saying it's good or bad. It's just doesn't have that power. It doesn't... There's something missing from these things. And it's because Jodo is not trying to make a movie. He doesn't give a shit about making movies. He wanted to change the world. He wanted to make a profit, not a Profit, but a Prophet. He wanted his film to be a profit for people, to change their minds. And he did it. He did it. His project did that. Maybe it wasn't a film, technically, but the work changed the world. It changed people's lives. And, you and I wouldn't be here today talking about this if he, didn't try to make this film, which didn't happen. It's all really weird.
But how much do you allow yourself to kind of acknowledge that your documentary also will have inspired people, also will have kind of continued those ripples of Jodorowsky's potential Dune into a whole new generation of people?
I think you're trying to say that my film is a prophet.
I think I am. Yeah. But with an F, no.
Definitely not. Definitely not with an F, that's for sure. I'll tell you that much. No, I mean, for sure. I mean, without the documentary, then, the story doesn't get out there, and Alejandro doesn't get out there in the same way. Like, even had I had let's say the documentary didn't get completed, but it was, let's say I started the documentary but didn't complete it. So let's say I started the documentary and I connected Alejandro and Michelle, and they went on to make Dance of Reality. He would have that career still. But there's the people that love that, and then there's the people that see this, that see Jodorowsky's Dune, having never heard of him, or having had or maybe have only heard the name but didn't know who he was, and they watch the movie and they come out transformed. They come out inspired. They come out in love with this guy, because how could you not be? You must have no soul if you don't walk away and say, I love this guy and I'll do anything for him. I mean, he's the greatest. But I think, he's a very specific filmmaker and he's a very specific artist. But the documentary sort of, I hope it expanded his reach. And people that maybe say, I don't know if I want to watch The Holy Mountain or El Topo. I've heard strange things about it. That's not for me. But when they see him speaking and they see, he's this real person and he's got these ideas, and they hear what he has to say, maybe their willingness is maybe expanded and opened, or they'll give something like El Topo a chance or Holy Mountain, and maybe they do, and they're and they're amazed by it. And then maybe they watch that and they say, that looks familiar. I've seen, in such and such music video that they took something from El Topo or took something from Holy Mountain. They can see his influence in other ways that we didn't even touch. But I think that just the documentary, just by its nature and just by allowing it to be, really the Jodo show, I hope that it, added to the conversation,
I'm sure it did.
I hope so.
I think, most of the people I've spoken to that have had any kind of a success in the movie industry have always talked about the level of passion you must have. It's come up again and again and again. And Alejandro seems to be a person more passionate than anybody I've kind of seen on film. And there's that moment in your documentary where the passion kind of tips over into this kind of raw rage, where he's kind of frustrated that it didn't get made and he wasn't allowed to fulfill his vision. How was that moment filming him? Did you feel a certain vulnerability that you hadn't seen in him before?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that was mean, he loses his temper all the time. He's yelled at me a million times. That's all fine. But this was something different. It's when he pulls that money out of his pocket.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I mean, even just thinking about it, I get chills and my eyes are going to well up with tears. Just him saying that it all comes down to this shit. This, nothing. It's just paper. There's nothing in this. And this is this nonsense that prevented me from doing this, and he tries to say that movies are more than this. Movies have heart, movies have soul, movies have intelligence, movies have all these things. And of course I wanted to do something like that. Of course. And he's still, and as much as he's a positive person, he's, thrilled that all these people, all of his spiritual warriors went on to go do these things. And he's thrilled at the success, all the successes they've had. And he's thrilled at the influence that his vision had on so many other films. There's still, I'm sure it's less now than it was in 1977, 1978. But that's still a little piece in him that's very hurt by this. By being rejected, by not being allowed to do this amazing thing. I mean, and he's 92 now, and we were filming him when he was, in his 80s, in his mid 80s, but still he's fiery. Yeah. I mean, he still has that in him. He's still making movies. I mean, it's like, he doesn't stop. He's an amazing person, but he's the most passionate artist I've ever met in my life, because he's always doing something different. Okay, I can't make a movie, I'll go write a book. Can't write a book, I'll do a painting. Can't do a painting, I'll do something with tarot cards. Can't do tarot cards, I'll write poetry on Twitter. He's always doing something. He's such a multifaceted artist and multifaceted person. He's really remarkable. Really remarkable.
I do wonder how Hollywood are going to tackle the Incal, and because we're now in an industry that didn't get to see what he could do with Dune. A lot of those ideas, of course, are recycled in that comic book. What's your feeling about it? I mean, obviously, I'm not asking you to review the movie before it comes out, but
sure.
Do you have a good feeling about it?
I do, because it's Taika. Because I've spoken to him. I did this little kind of announcement video for that, and I got to speak with him, and it's really genuine. I mean, first of all, he's a great filmmaker. I mean, he makes amazing stuff. He's hilarious and he's moving. His films are hysterical, but also gut-wrenching at times. He's really everything. He's a really, really interesting person. And he has these similar experiences also to Jodo growing up. So Alejandro Jodorowsky grew up in Chile, born and raised in Chile. Jodorowsky is not a Chilean last name, that's for sure. I mean, he's Jewish. Mm-hmm. Growing up born in 1929 in Chile, Jewish, wasn't that easy. He didn't have the easiest time. Same thing with Taika. I mean, he's from New Zealand. His father is Maori. His mother is Jewish. So he also kind of straddled this weird line over there. Mm-hmm. And they're both, neither one of them are the child of anyone successful in this business. They're both complete outsiders, literally from the ends of the earth. Chile is the end of the earth. The other end of the earth is New Zealand. I mean, they're both from the middle of nowhere. But they've both, through their own talent, desire, will, determination, stubbornness, whatever it is, have created something amazing. And I think that Taika does. I think the films he makes are really fascinating. Like, I love Boy. Like, Hunt for the Wilder People, Jojo Rabbit. These are amazing movies. And even you wouldn't. Even I told him when I was interviewing him, I said, "You made Thor. There's nobody to me less interesting than that comic book character. Like, when I was a kid, I used to read comics, but Thor, no, I would not spend my 35 cents to get a copy of that." And he said, "Me too." He said he was the worst. He said he was the worst, most boring character in the world. But he took that and he made something totally unique, totally different, he can do it. And I think he can do, and I think he's reached a point in his career where people are after him.
Yeah.
Like, he's supposed to do the next Star Wars. You know, he's working on the new Thor now. He does massive movies. And then he also makes movies about kids whose imaginary friends are Adolf Hitler. Yeah. I mean, he does whatever he wants, and he wants to do the Incal. I mean, that's his, because he sees that there's something cool here, there's something unique here, something done by two artists that he really respects, Jodorowsky and Mobius, and it's something that he can really put himself into too. And now that he's got Jodo's blessing, that's the biggest deal.
Yep.
You know, that he's not going to be over his shoulder, that Jodo was like, Jodo really loves Taika's movies. He thinks he's amazing. He's so genuinely excited that he's going to make it. And all those things are like, that's all a really good sign to me. And then the Incal is so weird. Like, it's such a weird, there's one character of, it's a guy with a dog's head. I mean, that's like a main character in the thing. Like, how is he going to make it? I have no idea. But I would have said the same thing about Jojo Rabbit. How is this guy going to make a movie like that? But he did it,
yeah.
And I think that's, I think Thor, I would never want to see such a thing. Thor, I would rather kill myself. God damn it. He did it, and he did something really surprisingly successful, surprisingly good. I couldn't believe it. So I think he's kind of the perfect person. What will it be? In the end, who knows? But I think there's a lot of, promise.
Yeah, I agree. I think, with Thor, I mean, I'm not a Marvel superheroes movie fan at all, but it felt like he has now kind of diverted the path that those films would otherwise have been on, and now they've become kind of something else.
Yeah. I think he's the one that did that. Yeah, I think he's the one that kind of started this weird trajectory. It's not all kind of boring guys all fighting each other in the city. It's like everything sort of changed after he came into that world, and where he sort of injected this bit of something different in that world. And those executives were like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, and it's successful. Oh, very good. Let's take that now. And they decide to go a little bit crazier, which is great.
Yeah, they would never have got there on their own. What's your next project then, Frank? I know you probably can't talk too much about it, but are you in the process of making something at the moment?
Yeah, I'm hopefully, knock on wood, finishing it in the coming months. I've been working on it for a bunch of years. It's very different than Jodorowsky's Dune. It's a documentary set in the Dominican Republic. It's centered on a music school, a free music school that teaches kids in the area how to play bachata music. I'd never been to the Dominican Republic. I'd never heard of bachata, let alone heard it. Then I learned that shame on me, it's the most popular genre of Spanish language music in the world. I was like, okay, I had no idea. And it all comes from the Dominican Republic. And here's this, very small school in quotes. It's like a shack on the north coast, which is totally free for any local kid who wants to come there after their regular school every day and learn how to play guitar and percussion and all that. So it's kind of like it's a film about this world, and it's really about these kids that go there, and it's kind of following their lives. But it's very different than Dune. There's no interviews, nothing like that. It's all verite. It's all just kind of following these kids. And it's like, to me, it's the goal to make it like Streetwise. I don't know if you ever saw the documentary called Streetwise. It's like that, but with really amazing music. So it's kind of really exciting. I hope. So far, so good. But hopefully we're closing in on the edit in the coming months, which will be very exciting. Yeah, I'm very excited by it.
Nice. Well, I look forward to seeing it, and appreciate your time today, Frank. And it's been great, getting to know you a little bit over the last few weeks. And
yes, we've really been texting a lot.
Yeah,
so many different things. So it's been really great to get to know you for sure.
We haven't even touched on the developing story of the Dune DAO. I mean, who knows where that's going?
That's because neither one of us understand anything.
No,
that's why. Like, in all these weeks, I haven't learned anything. I know nothing.
No, we've both been looking at the Discord, and it's like trying to learn Japanese, I guess. It's another language entirely, and it's, we talked about Alejandro talking about, this paper, this money is nothing, it's shit. I mean, those guys, and I think it's predominantly guys, that seems to be the way they view money, that it's just something to sort of, it gets in the way of things. So treat it in a different way and maybe you can make something special happen, but who knows?
I hope so. I mean, I hope that all their intentions are in the right place and that everything works out for them because, they made a big investment in this thing so far, and it's only going to get bigger. So, the requirements of the investment. So we'll see. But I have hope. You have to have hope, right? Isn't that what Jodorowsky says?
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat there with Frank Pavich. I certainly did. We were chatting this morning, actually. He recently went to see Alejandro, who's now, 92, 93, and said he was in great spirits and they had a good chat. I'm very much looking forward to seeing Frank's new documentary finished. I've seen a rough cut and I know that Frank has had some recent feedback from Michel Sardou on it, which was pretty to the point. So, yeah, looking forward to that when it comes out. Wish you well with that, Frank, and thanks for your time and your friendship over the last few weeks. Coming up on the podcast, I have my chat with Steadicam inventor Garrett Brown. I spoke to him just a few days ago and it was absolutely brilliant. I really did enjoy talking to Garrett. What a guy, what a gentleman, for giving his time and imparting all of his expertise and all of his stories from behind that Steadicam. Yeah, that's a really good one. I look forward to getting that out to you in February 2022. I'm still hoping to pin down a date with composer Daniel Pemberton. He's a difficult man to pin down because he's a man in much demand. I've had a firm no from Joe Dante's people. Actually quite gutted about that. I'm still trying to speak with directors Asif Kapadia and Alice Lowe. I've also recently tried to get in touch with Ben Burt. Fingers crossed on all of those. Also in the bag is my chat with VFX guru Craig Barron. You will have seen Craig's work, I guarantee it. He's worked on pretty much everything that you know and love since 1980's first film being The Empire Strikes Back. He's a real VFX expert and it was an absolute pleasure to talk to him as well. You're going to enjoy that one. That one will be the second episode in February 2022. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do so for as little as $1 per month or your currency equivalent. There's now an annual donation option. So for just $12 for the year, you'll be helping me book, research, record, edit, publish, promote 24 episodes. It was actually 28 in 2021. I never was good at maths, but there were 28 for some reason. I think a few bonus episodes were thrown in there. You can start anyway by visiting patreon.com/Jamie Benning. That's Patreon, patreon.com/JamieBenning. Yes, I have a double N, not like Annette Benning, who only has one N in the middle of her Benning. There are several tiers to choose from, many of which have certain perks attached to them. And if you can't afford to help and donate monetarily, then no problem. Just do what you can to help me get this very independent podcast. It is just me out there by leaving a review, a rating, perhaps retweeting. I'm on Twitter at JamieSWB. I'm on Instagram at Filmumentaries. I'm on Facebook. There's a Facebook Filmumentaries page. So any help you can give is greatly appreciated. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so again for episode 45 in February 2022. Take care. Bye for now.
This system makes of us slaves without dignity, without debt, no? With a devil in our pocket, this incredible money. In the pocket, this money, this shit this nothing, this paper who have nothing inside. Movies have heart, boom, 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 have mind, have power, have ambition. I wanted to do something like that. Why not?